I'm going to go into break. When I come back, I'm going to review the new Onslaught, or the upcoming Onslaught album, Origins of Aggression. And I'm going to talk about the upcoming Wasp compilation entitled B-Side. I think it's called B-Sides and Rarities. All of that coming up next here on the Metal Command Podcast. Hey everybody, it's Tony here from the Metal Command Podcast. I appreciate you watching this program, and if you want to see more of what I offer on this show, please by all means hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, follow me on any other social media outlet that you see this program, and again, I appreciate all of your support. Welcome back to the Metal Command Podcast. Tony here with you, and now it's time to talk about something fun, and that is the upcoming Onslaught album, Origins of Aggression, which comes out May 23rd, 2025. I believe that's the release date. I had Nige Rocket, one of the founding members of Onslaught and one of the guitar players in the band. Really awesome dude. He's been on my radio show before multiple times. Now, getting to talk to him face-to-face in an interview setting was just a lot of fun. And this compilation, or this album itself, is really, really cool. So let me kind of go through what this album is all about before I get into some of the aspects of it. So the album, it's a double album. The first part of that double album are re-recorded songs from the band's back catalog, basically from the first three albums they put out. And Power from Hell, The Force, and In Search of Sanity, those three albums. So it has re-recorded versions of those songs. And then there's the second part of the album, which has a bunch of covers that the band does. So let me talk about the first aspect of this, and then I'll get into the cover songs here in a second. So the first three Onslaught albums, especially the first two, it was really nice to hear re-recorded versions of those. So normally, I don't really care for bands when they re-record something. I don't really care for bands when they, go and try to make an updated version of an album. But in this case, in regards to Onslaught and their earlier material, I'm all for this. These songs are updated. They sound phenomenal. They sound a lot better than the originals. I know The Force had a little bit of a better production than the debut album did. And same with In Search of Sanity. But I think it was nice to hear some updated versions of these songs. And, Onslaught, Dave, their singer, I did touch on this aspect in the interview, which will be in the show notes, but they have a great singer too. This is a band that I have loved for years. And the interesting part about these re-recorded versions, the most interesting song in that list of tracks, because I expected the other songs to sound the way that they basically did, but the one song that was interesting to hear was the song In Search of Sanity. I say that because that was the third Onslaught album. It was, how do I say this, watered down from what they had done musically before, and they re-recorded it. Now, the original version had Steve Grimmett from Grim Reaper, who's not a thrash metal singer at all. May he rest his soul. Steve Grimmett, a phenomenal vocalist. But the way that album went and the direction that it went into, Nige was really not happy about that because it was pressure from the record label to make a record like that. But they did a re-recorded version of it with Dave, their singer, the thrashier version of it, which is the way that they intended for it to sound. And to elaborate more on that, let me go back to the interview I just did with Nige Rocket, where he talks about the song In Search of Sanity being re-recorded and gives a backstory behind it. Check this out. The interesting re-recorded track, probably the most interesting one on there, because I think, first of all, we'll get to Dave here in a minute, but I think he's an outstanding choice for a vocalist for this band, with just his voice and how he sounded on, the Generation Antichrist album, and just how he sounds on these songs. But the interesting song for me, which sounds different than the original, is going to be In Search of Sanity. Much different album, much different vocalist than Steve Grimmett, who is sadly not with us anymore. And was it challenging to do that? Because, all the other songs pretty in your face, straight ahead, brutal. But In Search of Sanity was a big departure from what you guys, and I think that album was actually very good, but it's a big departure
Yeah.
from your normal sound. And what was it like thinking about, why did you decide to actually re-record that song? And, was it kind of difficult to approach it with his style of singing?
No, it's something I've wanted to do, and the band want to do as well for some time. This is one album we want to re-record in full, which we will do. We've discussed it with the label already. We will record that album in future, because for me, it wasn't a true Onslaught album. I love the songs on it. The songs are fantastic, but due to, let's call it, label interference, etc., that album never came out how it should have been. It was very watered down in its sound, and with the addition of Steve Grimmett, may he rest in peace, great vocalist, absolutely great vocalist, but not really the right guy for Onslaught, I don't think. And yeah, I mean, a lot of people like it. It gave us a whole new fan base, but I think it kind of alienated some of the older fan base as well that didn't really appreciate that. And for me, it kind of it's haunted me a little bit, because it just never turned out how I envisaged that album to go, Especially after the demos we'd done with Psychia. They sounded like a natural progression on from The Force. But it just wasn't to be with that record. So it's important to me in the future to make that album and do it how I felt it should have been first time round.
Yeah.
So the weird thing about, obviously, we wanted to make it heavier, more aggressive, but usually Dave likes to have myself and a producer in when he's doing his vocals, but he went away and done this on his own at home. I don't know why. Because it was a big challenge for him to do, to match up or even go one step better than Steve Grimmett. Obviously not copying his voice at all, but delivering it in his style,
right?
How Onslaught wanted it to be right now. And he went away and did this on his own without any kind of direction or guide from us at all. And as soon as it came back to me, I was like, wow, this is fucking incredible. He's really nailed it and changed some important things. I mean, that he wasn't necessarily going to hit. I mean, he can hit some notes, man, but obviously Steve was right out there with his high vocals, but they've changed some things to take it other ways, and it sounds incredible. I think he's done absolutely amazing job on it, and I'm so pleased with that track. It's probably the most, for me, is the most pleasurable track on that album.
Yeah, he definitely brought new life into that song. When I heard that, actually, I'm not going to lie to you. When I saw that was on the track list, when I got the promo, I went to that song first because I wanted to see what that was. I knew the other songs, because Dave's vocals are very good. I knew the other songs would easily sound very good, and they do. But that was the curiosity for me. And it's always interesting when you talk about how the demos from that In Search of Sanity album actually sound different than how it turned out. Did his vocals on In Search of Sanity, is it close to what the demo sounded like, or is it slightly different?
Well, I don't even have copies of those demos anymore. I don't know where they are. I'm stupid in the fact that I don't ever collect anything. And I don't even have any of the demos from back in '82 or nothing. It's stupid, but I don't have copies, so we didn't have any reference to that either. So all I remember, it was with Cy singing in his style of The Force, and it was a lot dirtier and a lot heavier than what the album version was. So Dave had no reference to go to on that, and neither did we, and he just delivered big time.
And that's Nige Rocket talking about In Search of Sanity, the re-recorded version. I would love to hear the demos he refers to with Cy Keeler singing on the demos for that album, because obviously that record turned out a lot different, bringing Steve Grimmett into the band to sing a lot of those songs, which, kind of judging by what Nige Rocket says in that interview segment, that the current version they re-recorded for In Search of Sanity was more along the lines of how the band intended it to sound. But I did ask him, obviously he doesn't have any of those, demos anymore, but it would be interesting to find those and hear what they sounded like with Cy Keeler singing. Anyway, I thought the songs sounded amazing. Steve Grimmett, as much as I love his voice, probably wasn't the best fit for that type of music. But nevertheless, that is the story behind that. So really cool. It's a very good group of re-recordings in that first half of the album. Now let's get to the second half. You know, it's interesting because ever since doing this interview with Nige, I listened to probably every Motorhead album this past couple weeks, actually. Yeah, since we did the interview. It was about a week ago now. And they do a cover of Iron Fist, which is actually one of the singles they picked off of this compilation. That cover is awesome. And after talking about Motorhead with him, I realized again how much I miss Lemmy. Anyway, I digress. Let me go back into what I'm getting into. So there are a list of covers, and there is a story behind each of these covers. Now, the thing is, I talked to Nige about this. I didn't want to go through each individual track, but if you look in this compilation, there are a lot of covers from punk bands: Discharge, The Exploited, The Dead Kennedys. Just a lot of more punk covers, and obviously you have the Motorhead cover, right? So when you listen to Onslaught's music, like most of the thrash bands that are out there, the Bay Area scene, even the East Coast scene, like Overkill and like Anthrax, and you get to like a lot of the bands, from Germany, most of them, you hear a combination of punk music and obviously traditional heavy metal mixed in there. And, most of those bands too were huge Motorhead fans. So most of those thrash bands, you hear some of that, you hear some of that punk edge to it, but you hear mostly traditional metal mixed in there, and you hear a lot of Motorhead influence in many of them. With Onslaught, there is more of the punk influence and Motorhead influence than maybe the traditional metal influence, which is why you see more punk covers on this in this album. And I've always taken that from their sound. If you go and listen to the last album they put out, Generation Antichrist, you hear a lot of that. I always hear a lot of Motorhead and punk music in their sound mixed with a little bit of traditional metal. So they've been a much different band sound-wise than most of the thrash bands that have come along over the last, 40 years. So that's why you see a majority of those covers on there. Now, it's interesting because the covers he picked, the punk covers didn't surprise me, but one song in particular surprised me. It was a Judas Priest cover. Now, most people, when they cover Judas Priest, they don't really cover this song too often. I was actually shocked, but he covered the song Freewheel Burning. Now, I went and talked to Nige Rocket about all these covers and the stories behind them. Check out this interview clip where he talks about each of these bands that he covered and why he picked many of these particular songs, including Freewheel Burning, War Pigs, and all of the punk covers that are on here. Check out this interview clip. Well, I'm not going to go into each individual cover that you did, but I would like to talk about the bands you covered or what influence they had on you, because I think, the interesting thing about Onslaught and what really makes the band unique for me, if you listen to a lot of the other thrash bands at the time, the Bay Area bands, maybe a lot of the German heavy metal bands and the bands from Europe and stuff, like everyone talks about Sodom and Creator and all these bands, and they had a little more heavy metal, straight ahead classic heavy metal sound, a classic heavy metal sound to their music. Onslaught has kind of had a little more of the punk edge to their music. Like when I go and listen to, say, the first song off of Generation Antichrist, I can hear that in your music. And then when you look at the covers, who do you have on there? You have Motorhead, you have Discharge, The Exploited, Dead Kennedys, things like that. So a lot of these punk covers like Discharge and the Exploited and the Dead Kennedys and these punk bands, how big of an influence, because I know that was very big in Britain, in the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
How much influence did these bands have on you? Why did you choose those specific songs from a lot of these punk bands that were out that influenced your music?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I grew up on. I was into punk music from like 12 years old. First punk album I bought was Sex Pistols the day it was released, and that was like the biggest eye opener for me probably in my life. I was listening to kind of stuff like T-Rex, The Sweet, and David Bowie, and maybe a little bit of Queen, maybe back in those days. And then all of a sudden, this album came out of nowhere, and it was just like, what the fuck is this? This is like mind blowing, absolutely mind blowing at the time, because there was nothing even ever close to sounding like that record. Yeah, it changed my life musically from there on, and it was like I got into punk massively after that. Then the second wave came, which was even more aggressive and angry than the Pistols and the Damned and the Clash. They were kind of political, but this had a lot of anger when the second wave came with Discharge and the Exploited and things like that. And that really, because I was like kind of getting to that rebellious age then, when that really meant a lot to me personally as well.
Yeah,
so that was a massive influence on the band. And I used to follow those bands around with Paul, who I formed the band with. We used to follow Discharge, Exploited, GBH all over the UK. We got to know them. We used to get on the guest list for shows. We used to travel everywhere by whatever means, just to see these bands. And that was the influence to start a band for us. Like, we're following these bands over, let's make our own one, which is exactly what we did.
Well, it's interesting because when I look at the list of bands, all the thrash bands out there pretty much have that same list. Yeah. You kind of have a little more of the punk edge. The one band, what's really funny? The one band everybody universally loves in the thrash metal world is Motorhead. And that's actually the first, and it's actually one of my favorite bands ever. What kind of influence did a guy like Lemmy and that band have on you? You picked the song Iron Fist, which I think is cool because, you don't really see people cover that song too often. And I'm curious why you picked that specific song.
Well, the kind of Motorhead story started, obviously, when we used to go to our youth club, because we used to have to bully the DJ to play like all this punk music. So he'd play like 15 minutes of punk music or 20 minutes of punk music just to keep us quiet, in amongst all the disco and pop kind of music he had to play. But I remember the single Motorhead coming out, and it was like punk as fuck in a way, and obviously inspired bands like Discharge, and it kind of turned full circle.
Sure.
And they just had that raw punky edge, but a lot of melody in there. And once we started relearning the Power from Hell album to play live, I didn't realize how much influence Motorhead had on the songwriting. You may not notice it, or the fans may not notice it too much, but when I started playing all this stuff, listening to the key changes, I thought, wow, that's real kind of Motorhead, like key change there, or little bits of that. And I was like, wow, I surprised it was like maybe some subconscious influence, but it was like really there quite a lot, because there's some really kind of rock and rolly key changes in Power from Hell, not that you think about it, but I could hear the Motorhead influence very strong in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but the Iron Fist thing is a different story altogether. I mean, I've learned No Sleep from Hammersmith album helped me and my guitar player massively. I just love that album so much. It had such a great vibe, more so than their studio albums. Had a great sound on it. And I learned that album from start to finish, solos, everything, and it really helped me improve my playing doing all that. But when we were fortunate enough to go on tour with them in Europe on the Orgasmatron tour, it was 86 or 87. and Filthy had just come back in the band, so it was really special for us, like to have him there as well. But we arrived at the first date where we joined the tour was in Zurich in Switzerland, and we just rolled up at the venue just as they were about to sound check. And we walked in, we just stood by the desk. Was the other guys came out and they were waiting for Lemmy to appear. Even at sound check, he was so cool. Like he came out, grabbed his bass off the tech, like, and just stamped his foot on the floor 4 times, and they just crashed into Iron Fist for sound check. And it was like, fuck! It was like pinned to the back wall, man. I'd never heard nothing like it at the time. It was like so fucking loud and so powerful. It was just absolutely blew us all away. It was like we just looked at each other, like, what the fuck is this? Like, and that memory sticks in my head for forever, you know. Such a great song as well. So that's why we included that, because it was just they were so good to us, and that song had to be included just for that memory, you know.
Yeah. And then you did a Judas Priest cover on here, and it is a song that I cannot remember. I don't think I've ever heard a band cover it. I could be wrong, but you picked Freewheel Burning. Now, a lot of people pick a lot of other different Judas Priest covers to play. You guys decided to play that specific song, first song off of Defenders of the Faith, which is an interesting cover, because a lot of people would cover The Sentinel, for example, or, you know, maybe a different song off that album, but you picked Freewheel Burning. I'm interested to hear your story behind that.
That was down to me again, and my pursuit of becoming a more proficient guitarist, you know. Mm-hmm. I heard that track for the first time, and I just love the vibe of it. I love the aggression of it and the power, and the solo coming. I thought, wow, this is absolutely incredible. So I'd learned all the Motorhead stuff off there, which is kind of a different level to Priest in terms of guitar solos. I mean,
right.
Motorhead, very rock and roll bluesy type solos, and then the solo on Freewheel Burning is a lot more full on metal type shredding stuff, you know.
Sure.
I thought I got to learn this solo. I have to learn this solo. So I think it took me a fucking long time. Basically, I even slowed the record down at the beginning just to get the notes and get the phrasing and what's going on before I could speed it back up and jam along with it, you know. Yeah. I nailed it in the end. It took me a long time, but I was so chuffed when I actually nailed it and I've got this, and it improved and taught me a lot of things about playing lead guitar at the time. So that's why that track was included on the album. Plus, it was my favorite Priest track, and it still is.
I'll be honest with you, it's probably close to being my favorite Priest album, but I was actually surprised when I saw that as a cover. Just because it's not a typical song people would probably cover by that, even though it's very good.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. But it learned loads for me. It improved my playing no end and taught me all sorts of different things about soloing. So
yeah. Well, and I'll ask you one more question about the covers before I get into my next set of questions. I'm going to ask you. You have Black Sabbath, War Pigs, obvious choice. I mean, probably the most influential band in metal. What impact? Everybody has a different story of how Black Sabbath influenced them. You know, some people, will even talk about the Dio years. Some people will talk about the first couple albums. For you, why War Pigs? Very common song for people to typically cover, but what's your story behind that track?
I think it's just got a unique vibe about the song, but it was the lyrics that really grabbed me, you know?
Yeah.
Being that kind of ilk of a song, it was very relevant lyrically. And the music, when I first heard it, was almost secondary, but then once you see beyond, I was listening to the lyrics and see beyond that, and then it's an incredible song. It's not the most energetic Sabbath song, not the most lively or aggressive song, but it just got something very dark about it. And we used to jam it at rehearsal a lot, just because it was so cool, you know. I mean, it's not intricate, it's not going to improve our playing a great deal, but it was just a song that had that vibe. It was so heavy and powerful, and like I said, the lyrics just were incredible. So we have took it up a notch or two in tempo wise, just to give it a bit more of a, say, thrashy feel, but it certainly brings it to life a lot more. And yeah, I just that was it. The lyrics sold it for me straight away.
And that's Nodge Rocket talking about the different covers and everything on this album. So we talk about a lot in that interview. We talk about the U.S. tour they did with Neil Turbin, which when I saw him kind of drop his head a little bit, probably something that he doesn't want to think about. We talk a lot about the band's history. I talk about in that interview with him about how he found his current singer, Dave, who is just a phenomenal vocalist for this band. And we talk about, you know, possibly working on an upcoming album. You know, and Nige also had some medical issues related to performing on stage. Sadly, he did bring that up a little bit. I didn't want to go too deep into that, but it sounds like it was very similar to some of the medical issues Tom Araya had from Slayer, just from, you know, banging his head on stage over the years. So it's a really great album. I love the updated re-recorded versions of many of the older songs, and I like a lot of the covers they picked. The Iron Fist cover, hands down, best one there. They picked that as a single. That was the song I probably would have picked as a single as well. But that cover of Free Wheel Burning is really cool. I was actually shocked at how good that was, because when I saw that, I thought to myself, this is interesting, because this was not what I expected. But, you know, obviously in that interview clip I just played, he touches on that. So I'd give this compilation, as I call it a compilation because, you know, these aren't original songs, but they are re-recordings. So I give these re-recordings. I'll tell you what, I normally don't like re-recordings. I'm 50-50 on them. I give this thing a 9 out of 10. It's really that good. I think if you are an Onslaught fan and you like the old stuff, I think they did some very good updated versions of those songs. And I think the covers they picked, I can't go look at the list of covers they picked and say to myself, well, I don't like any of them, because all of them are very, very well done. And I like all the original songs as well. You know, he picked some really, really great songs by some of these bands. Some of them not as well known as some of the other songs those bands put out. So I thought it was cool. So 9 out of 10 for me for the upcoming Onslaught album, Origins of Aggression. Hey everybody, Tony here from the Metal Command podcast. Again, I appreciate your support. Since 1998, I have hosted this show in one form or another, starting off in radio and now in the podcast format. Again, thanks for watching, and if you like what you see and hear on this show, by all means, please hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, and if you see this program on any other form of social media, please give me a follow there. Again, I always appreciate your support.